It is Friday, December 17th. Let's talk PlayStation. Welcome back, everybody. We are getting very close to what should be an expected downturn of video game-related news once we get into Christmas, New Year's, first week, 2 weeks of January. Normally, that's where a lot of people in the games business are going on holiday. They've got some time off, and so it should be quiet, but still, with that being right around the corner, this past week was fairly busy, so we have a lot to go over. Let's start off, as always, with our PS Plus reminder. The December games are still available. Make sure you grab them, add them to your library, download them, do whatever you want. But first, let's talk about this, because this piece of news was published right after LTPS last week. Historically, Fridays are pretty quiet, but that doesn't seem to be the case the past few months or so. And it's not major news, but PlayStation did announce a new acquisition. It is Valkyrie Entertainment. Now, this one, it's not really... It's one of those, like, sensible acquisitions, right? Where Valkyrie Entertainment, they don't really do their own games. Now, they did one. I believe they only did one, which was Guns Up back in 2014-15. That was, like, a free-to-play mobile-esque game that Sony did publish across PS4, 3, Vita, and also PC, and I think that's all they've done in terms of original content. But otherwise, they are primarily a contract studio. They do a lot of outsourcing work. They've probably worked on some of your favorite franchises throughout PlayStation's IP, but also, you know, third-party stuff as well. They do a lot of that stuff. So they're a very talented team of individuals, and this is something where it's just a sensible acquisition to support the rest of PlayStation Studios moving forward. So it's kind of like in the same veins of the Malaysia team or Audio Kinetic or, you know, XDev, right? We might not necessarily see what they're doing or how they're supporting the rest of PS Studios in terms of being a forward-facing or public-facing developer, but it's something where they will be supporting the rest of PlayStation moving forward. At least for right now, we can say that for Sony, this is how they go about doing acquisitions. They don't necessarily want IP. They have their own IP. They're always going for talent, and Valkyrie Entertainment is talent. Moving on to our next news story, Sony has finally announced a new wave of DualSense Colors on top of the expected introduction of official PS5 faceplates, which for that, they're calling them console covers, so just keep that in mind because since launch, most people call them faceplates. They're calling them console covers. But let's talk about the DualSense first, because we're getting 3 new colors here: Starlight Blue, Galactic Purple, and Nova Pink, which they all look quite nice. I will say I wish it was a darker blue, which I'm sure that'll come eventually, but for right now we've got this baby blue, light blue, and I'm already warming up to it because it's the only blue that's going to be available. But again, Sony's had a much slower rollout when it comes to colors, so we'll have a lot down the road, but right now this is what we're getting. And these controllers will drop on PS Direct first, January 14th. If not, you can wait till February 11th for most other retailers to get them. And I will say PS Direct is actually a pretty good place to buy from. If you're a PS Plus member, day 1 free shipping, not too bad there. They're also finally fulfilling orders in the UK and most of Europe now, I think, at this point as well. So it's not a bad place to buy from. Now, in terms of the console covers, they're starting with the Midnight Black and Cosmic Red first to color match with the DualSense controllers that you may already have. And those will be available first on PS Direct, January 21st. If not, February 18th for most other retailers. When it comes to the blue, pink, and the purple, that should be available at some point in the first half of 2022, so no exact dates for those just yet, but they will be priced at $55 for disc or digital. I warned this before that when Sony does their own plates, they're probably going to be expensive because they're just 2 sheets of plastic and they can get away with it, right? That's kind of the point, because like when you look at the D-brand ones, which are a nice high-grade quality, they were priced at like $50 to $70 or something, depending on if you buy that like middle strip to that vinyl strip for the middle of the console, but it's around the same price range, and that's third party. The vast majority of the cheap ones from eBay, all those factories out of China, right? I've reviewed a lot of them, and they're not really a great quality. I mean, you can get them for like $28, $30, but like they're just not good. So outside of like buying an entirely new console, they can get away with selling these at like $50, right? Because it's still going to be more convenient and cheaper to seamlessly change the color of your console if you want to for that price rather than buying a whole new one. So I'm not going to say like you should buy these, but if you really want a different color, I would say go for Sony's offerings, because you're also going to get a proper OEM grade plate where the quality is there, the PlayStation buttons on the inside, that little Easter egg is there, the PlayStation logo is punched out where it should be because third parties can't do that. So if you want a proper PS5 cover, then I would say you're probably going to have to go with Sony's, and that will be available relatively soon. Now, moving on to our next story, if you remember this past summer, we had that kind of a big blowout when it came to PlayStation's support for independent developers, which was sparked by a Twitter thread of a developer voicing their concerns and, problems with that platform holder and how they go about working with smaller indie devs, and very much that means smaller devs, not quite the indie games that Sony showcases on the PS blog or during live streams, state of plays. We're very much talking about games on a much smaller, modest budget, and a lot of those developers had some problems, right? Justifiably. Well, recently, IGN has obtained a new copy of a document titled the 2021 Global Partner Survey Results, which is a follow-up from a survey conducted before. And it doesn't directly call out the IGN articles or the Kotaku article where they reached out to some of those developers and, asked them what their frustrations were, but it does address 3 key areas for improvement, which would be reducing complexity of the communication channels with Sony, more transparent analytics on game sales, engagement, and promotions, and finally, modernizing the toolset and ticketing system to address partner issues much faster. Now, at the time, one of the developers that voiced their concerns was David Logan, the CEO of Capara Games, where he actually pointed out that once that story was published, their brand manager and also Greg Rice, the head of PlayStation creators at Sony, reached out to them, and he says, and I quote here, "They were obviously crushed at the news, and it was clear that the account managers at Sony had been working hard for a long time to push through a lot of the ideas the indie developers flagged in our initial discussions. After the articles that seemed to give a huge boost to initiatives they had already been planning, because rapidly after Sony started rolling out a bunch of big changes." So this is great news. You definitely want to hear this, especially because when a lot of that news came out, I was seeing a lot of people throw it around like, oh, the media is pushing some sort of narrative or bias that Sony doesn't support indies, but look at all these state of plays, look at the PS blog. And again, it's like we weren't necessarily talking about those types of games because, yeah, they're still indie, right? But some of those games that Sony likes to showcase on a state of play or the PS blog can still have a budget of, $500,000 to over $1 million. We were talking about smaller games, but still it largely depends on what developer or what their experiences have been, right? So regardless of budget, they may still have had some sort of frustration with how it works to actually get your game published and up and running on PlayStation. And for some of the accounts I've heard of as well, it is kind of a massive pain, but it's great to hear that there is some improvement here. Probably the biggest issue is still not rectified here, which is that developers cannot run sales on their own. They still have to be invited to do so for those themed sales on the PS Store. And it sounds like they're offering those invites more frequently, but still developers cannot run their own sale if they want to, which is really frustrating if a developer wants to pass savings on to you and they do so on Switch, Xbox, Steam, and they cannot do that on PlayStation. That's still frustrating, but at the very least it looks like they are going in the right direction, not just for some big larger independent games, but every developer, every partner, right? If they've got a problem and they've identified it, at least they're actually doing something about it. This is good news and you should be happy about it. Now, moving on to the Uncharted movie, not really big news here, but we do finally have a final movie poster to look at, which, there you go, that's what it is. And you love to see it. Tom Holland, Mark Wahlberg, looking like Tom Holland and Mark Wahlberg. And if you try really hard, you might be able to see a hint of young Nathan Drake, and if you try even harder, you'll still see Mark Wahlberg, because it's just, I can't get him. I can't see him as Sully, and I'm sure a lot of you can. Yeah, it's like I said before, I bet it's probably a fun action flick with all the cinematic shots and whatnot. I'm sure that'll be fine, but it's going to be a tough sell in terms of it being a proper Uncharted movie. But I'll reserve final judgment until I see it, and I will watch it before I give that review of oh, this is an awful movie. Even if we're all thinking the same thing, wait until you watch it yourself, which I also wouldn't put it past you if you wait until it's if it shows up on TV or something. Moving on to Horizon Forbidden West, we finally got some PS4 screenshots, which, keep in mind, nowadays, when it comes to any cross-generation game, doesn't matter what developer or publisher it is, you're almost always going to get shown the current gen version before last gen, but we did finally get PS4 screenshots for Horizon, and it does look quite good, which is not really surprising, right? This is Guerrilla Games. You don't have to like their gameplay or their narratives, but they've always delivered on the visual front, and this is no different. Which, of course, it's PS4, right? You're going to be expecting 1080-30 on a base PS4 or checkerboard rendering 30 FPS on a PS4 Pro, but still, they've accomplished a lot here on PS4, and they can make screenshots look very pretty, which is probably also something to keep in mind. I will say that when it comes to the dramatic differences between the two, I mean, we'll have Digital Foundry near launch, which will showcase all that stuff, but what you will be expecting realistically is the high resolution textures, of course, the performance, so PS4 or PS5 rather, having a 60 FPS mode or native 4K at 30 FPS, but it's just it's the high resolution textures, the vegetation, the foliage, which for a game like, in the context of Horizon, that goes a long way in terms of how the game will look visually. The hero lighting, just a lot of things that they can do to really stretch out how much better the game will look versus PS4, right? But with that said, they've accomplished a lot on PS4, and this game is going to be no different. Now, speaking of Horizon, we can also bring up that recent trailer that Guerrilla Games put out, where this one's being presented on PS5, but it's showcasing all the various machines in that world, roaming around the environment in what can only be described as their natural habitat, because that's the point, right? That's what was so great about Zero Dawn, is that contextually all those machines had a place and a purpose in that world. Same deal here, so this isn't really gameplay, but you're seeing the machines up close and personal, and it's like we said, it's a visual showcase, it really is. These machines look unique, it's a beautiful looking game. Can't wait. Normally for me, I'm very patient with most major releases. I just have a huge backlog, right? So I don't get too excited for a big release until it's like maybe 1 or 2 weeks away, and I'm either thinking like, oh, do I have time to play this? Or like, oh, I have time to play this, now I can get excited. But this game, it's close. It's close enough for me to like actually be pumped for it, and I'm ready to dive in. Now, we can also quickly mention that for the PC version of Zero Dawn, this saw another update, version 1.11.1, some minor fixes in there, but we actually found out that it was Nixxes software that recently helped put out that big patch for the PC version, so as far as I'm aware, this is the first time where we've got confirmation of what they've actually done since joining PlayStation Studios, so not really a major piece of news, but there's one example finally of Nixxes software supporting the PC initiative for PlayStation, right? So helping fix some of these rough launches for, say, Zero Dawn, where that came out not all that great. And I imagine they're either working on more patches or possibly finally working on that backlog of PC releases, which we should be expecting. Now, for our next news story, Destruction All-Stars. Yes, this game is still a thing, and it's getting a big update in January. So over on the subreddit, Lucid Games recently pointed out that this update's going to have what I would probably describe it as a fresh coat of paint across various UI elements, right? So things like the HUD, the main menu. When you're actually playing the game, they're going to scale up certain information that maybe is seen as more important, scaling back information that is seen as redundant, putting in visual indicators of like when you slam a car, is it a big slam, a small slam, a lot of context cues, things that might very well change the gameplay feel in a different way, right? So not necessarily mechanics, but that's how they phrased it essentially, and I don't want to summarize the whole thing, but it's quite a long post. But there is still a community there playing the game. If you played it back in February, I would say maybe try it once this update comes out. It would still be surprising to have this game have some sort of really big U-turn. I'm not expecting it, which I hate saying. I would love to see a PS4 version, a PC version. I'd like to see Sony really put more investment into the game and try and like make it a thing, but it just seems like the game did not land or resonate with enough people. So for now, at least, there's a big update coming. I would say give the game another shot once that update drops, but we'll see. Now, while we're talking about Lucid Games, we can go on to our next story, which is adding more credibility or evidence to that ongoing rumor about Lucid Games possibly doing a Twisted Metal reboot on PS5, which would launch sometime in 2023. It would be like a free-to-play game launching next to the TV show that's in development, which we know is a real thing. And, you know, back when these rumors came up a few months ago, we actually had a few sources surrounding it, so it's not confirmed clearly, but it seems probable that maybe that's what's actually happening, and at least what we saw was a discovery on LinkedIn, a former technical designer at Lucid Games, where their CV was updated, and it says, They worked at the company between August 2020 and October 2021 on an unannounced first-party flagship AAA IP for the PlayStation 5. Now, Destruction All-Stars, the timeline, I mean, that game is public. I mean, they're not talking about that. So this would be directly in line with what we've heard about them doing Twisted Metal. And we can actually also see that for the animation director on their LinkedIn. They've got multiple unannounced projects, and if we go to Lucid's website, they've got a few job listings, so they're still hiring, right, for a level designer open world, experienced free-to-play designer, senior multiplayer programmer. I mean, it's not exactly surprising that they're hiring or that PlayStation may or may not be contracting them out to work on a first-party IP, and maybe more, because we do have another rumor about Wipeout making a return, which I think we only have one source on that still, where it's really iffy. They're not sure if it's at Lucid or somewhere else, so that's an entirely different conversation to be had, but it seems obvious to me that this is going to be another long-standing partner for PlayStation in the foreseeable future, which may or may not indicate a possible acquisition, because at this point, when it comes to the acquisition talk, obviously Sony's getting a lot more aggressive, but there's not many obvious suspects left, right? They actually grabbed most of them. PlayStation does not acquire IP, they acquire talent, and so if they're contracting Lucid out, they're very much in that process where if they can deliver, maybe a conversation will start there, and if the numbers work for both parties, they can come to an agreement, but that's much further away. It's just that I would suspect that's what's happening right now. Moving on to our next news story, we've got some indicators that hardware supply has been really supply constrained for this holiday season. So we had the US November NPD come out, and this is where it fell by a lot in terms of dollar spend. So year to date overall, actually, spend across video games in general, hardware, software, accessories, that's up 9% for the entire year versus last year. But in terms of November, it's actually down 10%, and that's largely due to hardware sales, where consumer spend is down 38%. And, well, for Nintendo Switch, that was still number one in terms of dollar sales and units sold in November, but between Nintendo Switch, PS5, Series S, X, probably more X, because S availability is not too bad, but supply it's low. It's very low. And that kind of goes into what we were talking about prior about Sony reaching their sales forecast going into the quarter ending March 2022. They might fall short, because this would have been the one quarter where if they had a lot of stock allocation, if they were really saving up and wanting to ship as many consoles as they reasonably could within this time frame, it doesn't seem like that's happening based on the November performance. Now, maybe December is a bit better, but anecdotally, you can't really say much, right? There's been a lot of stock drops, but they still go within a matter of a few minutes or throughout various waves throughout the day, right? They're sold out immediately. It's just clear that there's stock's bad across the board, which kind of goes into the story and conversation that a lot of people have been having about PS5's performance in Japan, where it's just, it's low. I mean, they're doing maybe 1,000 consoles every week or every month or something like that. It's something crazy where Switch allocation's obviously much higher for that country, where people are actively buying and spending on Switch. But it's like the perfect storm for how bad PS5 is going to do in Japan, where stock is severely low. You have to allocate a lot of that to your key markets, where your big spenders are North America, Europe, so of course they're going to get the most. Japan as a country has had console play decline dramatically, so naturally you're going to have lower allocation there. It's the perfect storm for embarrassing numbers in Japan. So I can't really fault Sony for the amount of PS5s they're shipping there, but it seems clear so far that for November and possibly December, PS5 stock was not good. Wasn't really good at all. And same for Microsoft. It's still going to be a long time until these things are readily available to buy. Anyway, moving on to our next news story, let's talk about PS5 console exclusive Forspoken, because recently a 4-minute uninterrupted gameplay clip was put out, and it's not a trailer where there's cuts or it's not dressed up to look pretty for you. It's very much raw gameplay, so much so that you can see that it's really rough around the edges when it comes to the performance. The FPS drops a lot on it, and I understand that there's some concerns or early concerns there, or maybe more in line with fear mongering, but we can't do that or humor that right now. you should never do that when it comes to early pre-release alpha footage, beta footage, anything like that. You can't do it. Most developers will tell you that up until the very end, a game could look or could be in a very rough state. Optimization is happening the entire way through, and that goes for all the way until the very end, right before the game ships. So we can't really talk about that or judge it just now, but we can judge the rest of it, which I can see where there are some other concerns setting in about how the world looks empty, how the enemies are just kind of standing around doing nothing, waiting to be, beaten up, or all the dialogue cues that Frey keeps bringing up while she's fighting. And I agree, it's a little bit excessive, but it is also a Japanese developed game, which is not uncommon for Japanese games. What's interesting, I think, or I guess most noteworthy, is that it is raw gameplay. So I think you can kind of boil that down to most other games where naturally you just run past certain enemies and they kind of stand there looking like they're doing nothing until you engage them. And then when you do engage them, if you're an over-leveled character, maybe you can handle them quite easily. I don't know. It very much looked natural in that sense, where it just wasn't really an exciting moment. It just looked like open world gameplay where you just run into some enemies and start beating them up for no reason. So I don't know if this is truly indicative of the gameplay loop just yet, but I can certainly see where the concerns might set in when you watch the gameplay and it doesn't inspire much hope. But at the very least, we did get confirmation of some performance settings, which I could have sworn we heard about these prior, but just in case, there's going to be 3 modes, 4K 30 FPS, also one that's 1440p 60 FPS. I imagine that scales, but there's that, and then also a ray tracing mode. No clue if that's 1080 and goes up from there or something like that, but at least for Forspoken, that's where that's where we are with that game. We'll see if it turns out okay, but it also wouldn't surprise me if it does come out and it's like maybe a mediocre 6, 7 out of 10, kind of like a Godfall, right? Another Godfall. Now, what's probably more encouraging is the recent gameplay for Sifu, where not only did footage come out for that, but also some hands-on, some previews, and at least right now the sentiment seems to be that for the short demo and access that they had, the gameplay and the fighting, it's definitely as tight and as responsive as it looks, right? It's snappy, it's quick, it works, it's gratifying. The aging mechanic seems to be an interesting way to go about doing difficulty, where if you keep dying and you get older, your health goes down, but your power goes up, so you sort of turn into a glass cannon where you might get knocked out more easily, but if you're good with parrying and you can avoid hits, you can take out a whole room a lot faster and much more effortlessly. And we did get confirmation that a physical copy is on the way in spring, so not around launch, which is unfortunate, but hey, I'll take it. If there's a disc, I'll patiently wait. Sifu is sounding really good so far. I'm glad to hear that this one is shaping up to be as good as it looks. Moving on to our next news story, the PS4 has been hacked, which on its own, that's a statement that doesn't really mean much of anything. The PS4 has been, opened up before for custom firmware and things, but what is noteworthy about this is that it's a very recent firmware, 9.0. So over on Twitter, @SpectreDev did prove this. They showed it off. The exploit is out there, 9.0, which the most recent firmware is 9.03, but at 9.0, chances are a lot of people still have consoles sitting on possibly 8.5 and up, right? So actually, this opens up a lot in terms of the official games that you can play that require a recent firmware, and then also exploiting PS4 and doing homebrew and not advocating piracy. Obviously, that's always a side effect or an evil that comes with opening up a console, but just bear in mind, not advocating that. But 9.0, very recent. And what's also really noteworthy is that one of the other members in this group over on Twitter, Z, they mentioned that this exploit could potentially work on PlayStation 5 as well, and it's not ready or going to be released because the lead developer does not have a PS5. Oh, the irony. I guess that's the one benefit to not actually having supply, is that hackers can't open up your system. But we'll keep following the story because, like we said before, if PS5 is opened up this early into its life cycle, then Sony's not going to be thrilled with that. So we'll follow the story as it develops. Next up, it's been recently discovered that Sony Interactive Entertainment filed a new trademark for the Order 1886 on December 9th, and that is true, they did. And I know a lot of you sent this to me, but unfortunately, you probably didn't see that the reason for this is because the old trademark was either canceled or expired. I don't know what happened exactly, but it was on December 3rd. So the company must have been notified about that happening, and then they just filed a new one because it's their property. Of course, they're going to protect it and hold it, even if they're not going to do anything with it. And in the context of the order, I would say nothing's going to happen with this property. It seems obvious to me. I mean, you have to remember that for the order, Ready at Dawn set up a really interesting story and atmosphere. Gameplay was okay, and they left it off on a cliffhanger, so clearly they wanted to do more, but they weren't given that opportunity, and now they're acquired by Oculus. So even if Sony wanted to do another one, do you really want them to contract it out to somebody else? I would prefer Ready at Dawn do it to see their vision through, the story that they wanted to tell. Also, they can have the opportunity to rectify a lot of the issues with that previous game. So I just don't think that would really make sense. I think this IP is pretty much donezo, because it's not going to be Ready at Dawn doing it, and you don't really want somebody else doing it. That's at least how I see it, but that's probably what's happening here. Sony protecting their property. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or Twitter, and if you would like to win a $10 PSN code, it's very easy. Follow the link down below. Supporting this channel a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week because I'm trying to help pay for your games. Those are all the stories that I want to talk about to you all from this past week. Our Tuesday video was 2022 games. There's a lot coming out. And unsurprisingly, right when I published that, I knew there was going to be some things I forgot, but what's weird is that Pray for the Gods, that was a TBA 2022 game. I researched it for that video, and it just dropped day of, like on Tuesday, or maybe it was recent. It was on Friday, or not Friday, Wednesday, right? Like it just came out. So there you go. There's one game that's available. But otherwise, you can get a quick glance at 2022 games, release windows, release dates, things like that. And then coming up, as always, another Tuesday upload. We are zeroing in on LTPS 500, which is kind of crazy. I am probably not going to do anything special because I don't know. I don't know what I could really do. But there's that. And then our 2022 predictions, that's coming out very soon as well once we tick over to the new year. But that's it. That concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.